should you get a PC handheld or should you get a Steam Deck? Well, what if you could have the best of both worlds for $800? Bazzite is a Linux distro that matches Steam OS almost to a T. It's never been easier to get a Steam Deck-like experience on a Windows handheld. Although it could be like a little easier. It's still pretty easy, but it could be like a little easier. Yeah, I was asking the same questions you are. What's even the point? The whole point of a Steam Deck is that it's powerful and also cheap. A lot of games are compatible with the Steam Deck, but not everything. So the idea of paying a lot more just to turn it into a Steam Deck sounds kind of dumb. And then I did it, and now I completely understand why everybody thinks this is so cool. It's easy to underestimate just how great the Steam Deck user experience is. I sing its praises all of the time, but even I underestimated just how much I would like it here. I didn't realize everything was just gonna sort of work and work really well. Now there is a decent amount of setting up to do. It took me about 2 hours. Realistically, it took me all day because I was like coming back to it every couple hours. There aren't actually a lot of steps. It's extremely manageable to do, but there are a lot of loading bars, most of which only took me a few minutes. But they could take you hours depending on what you're doing. Both the ROG Ally X and Bazzite make this setup super easy to do. And what convinced me to even want to do this in the first place is that you can dual boot Windows and Linux. So you can always switch back to Windows if you don't like it. It's non-destructive. For example, if a game you want to play doesn't run in the Linux OS, you can just boot up Windows and just play it on Windows without any additional hardware. The setup does require a little bit of hardware. It actually requires a keyboard, and you might as well plug in a mouse too. I was alternating my USB-C cable between a mouse and a keyboard like a weirdo. You will also need a USB drive for the initial install. I tried using a micro SD card, but it will not work in the micro SD card slot. You need to be able to plug it in through USB. This last part is optional. You can use the drive that's already in the ROG Ally. The ROG Ally X comes with a 1 terabyte SSD, which is more than enough to split in half between Windows and Linux. I opted to upgrade to a 2 terabyte SSD. I got this Samsung 990 Pro off of Amazon, and it came same day. The Ally X takes 2280 NVMe, so this was easy and relatively cheap. If you're going to do this on an ROG Ally or Lenovo Legion Go, make sure you get a 2230 NVMe. For the easiest upgrade, it's nice to have an SSD enclosure, so you can just migrate everything over to a new drive. If you're gonna use an enclosure like this, make sure it is very fast and make sure you are using a fast enough cable. Otherwise, that migration could take hours. For me, it took just a couple of minutes with this setup, and I will link all of the stuff that I used in the description below. And that's all that you need. And then in the end, you'll get a very powerful handheld without the overhead of Windows that's capable of everything that a Steam Deck can do, and also play Windows games if you want. You can circumvent the terrible Windows UI entirely by just having a Steam Deck. It's just a little bit of a smoother experience. And if you've got some incompatible games, you can just switch right back to Windows. It's super easy to set up, and it truly is the best of both worlds.
This video is sponsored by Surfshark. Imagine a world where your online activity isn't tracked. Imagine the freedom to be able to do whatever you want on the internet. With Surfshark, I can be sure that not even people on my own network can track my activity.
Hey, what's going on in there?
Nothing, I'm doing my homework.
Homework? You're like 49 in dog years.
I'm auditing a class at DeVry. VPNs can help change your location so that you can access content that might otherwise be blocked in your country, but they can also help you encrypt your data so that nobody on your network can see what you're doing, not even your owners. So you can have the freedom to do whatever you want on the internet. Surfshark One gives you their VPN, private web search, data leak alerts, and their antivirus. There's no risk to trying Surfshark, and they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. Secure your privacy with Surfshark. Enter code DEN, D-E-N, for 4 extra months for free at surfshark.deals/den.
Oh, Zim, I got another letter from the ISP again.
It wasn't me. It was the cat. I was lonely. It's a trauma response. I can't help it.
It says you've been a good boy.
Hey, man. Do you think this is f***ing funny?
Now, you could just use big picture mode. This is like the easiest Steam Deck-like experience. This is how I have my Lenovo Legion Go set up. But it takes a bit to load Windows and then load into big picture mode. Also, sometimes it runs slow. Also, loading a game from big picture mode sometimes closes big picture mode. Also, Windows is still running all of its bullshit in the background. There's a lot of reasons why having an entire Linux distro would make a lot of sense, and all of these little reasons end up adding up. Now, performance should not be any better on Linux than it is on Windows. It should be theoretically the same. There shouldn't be any noticeable benchmark or any like major increases in frame rate or anything. I want to say that it feels snappier. Shaders compile quickly, load times are snappier. I was getting around the same frame rates in games as I was in Windows, sometimes with minimal improvements in Linux, but I remember there being a lot more stuttering in some of these Windows games. This feels incredibly stable. This surprised me a lot. And this is probably in large part due to Windows having a lot more processes running and a lot more overhead.
And probably because Linux will compile the shaders before you start playing the game for the first time, and Windows will compile the shaders while you're playing the games for the first time. So that might have something to do with it.
Linux is extremely bare bones. You're basically just running the game, and that's it. There's no background processes running, at least not as much as there is in Windows. The UI here is enough to get me interested in this and enough to get me to want to play games on here, but this snappiness just takes it to a little bit of another level. It's a lot easier to recommend because of that. This is like having the most premium Steam Deck that you can get. As always, this is not a tutorial. There are plenty of great tutorials out there that you can use to do this. I just want to sort of give you the spark notes so that you can get a brief overview of what this would be like if you want to try it yourself. And I also want to show you some of the problems that I had so that you can help troubleshoot if you run into those problems too. Oftentimes, tutorials look a lot easier than they are. It's often not the tutorial maker's first time doing the thing. You and I are not Retro Game Corp, unless you're watching this. Hi, Russ. And we will probably run into some problems, and we should slow down and take a look at where those problems might happen. All things considered, there weren't too many problems, considering how complicated this process should be. Speaking of Retro Game Corp, he does have a great video tutorial that he just posted on this, and I watched that after I already installed everything onto mine, because it wasn't out yet. I used a guide that was actually linked on the Bazzite website from a YouTuber named Cyber Dopamine, which is a sick name, dude. Either of those is fine for you to watch. There is some stuff at the end of Cyber Dopamine's tutorial that I don't think you need to do anymore, but his video also covers the Lenovo Legion Go. It's a very similar process, but there are one or two extra steps that are important, so you should definitely watch his video if you want to do this on the Lenovo Legion Go. There's also a written guide that I'll link below, which will probably have the most up-to-date information on everything. Although, it's nice to bounce around between a video tutorial and the written guide. The written guide doesn't have too much detail in it, and it's nice to follow along and watch somebody actually go through all of the steps. But even before that, there's some prep to do. I'm gonna put a whole new SSD in here. And this is the same process that I've done on the original ASUS ROG Ally when I wanted to upgrade the storage. I used a tutorial by Joey Retro Handhelds, and this is more or less the same. You're gonna use an app called Macrium Reflect, which has a free trial, and you only need to do this once, so it should be free for you. The only thing different that I did here that Joey didn't do in his tutorial is I selected to use the exact partition length. This means that it will copy the entire 1 terabyte drive that was already in my ROG Ally X over to the 2 terabyte drive, but it will not fill that extra space. That extra 1 terabyte that's left over will be free space that we'll use later for the Steam OS. Both video guides will show you how to create a bootable Bazzite USB drive using Balena Etcher. I ripped Bazzite to a micro SD card with a card reader, and that worked fine. Remember, the ROG Ally cannot boot from the micro SD card slot for some reason. It's extremely easy to unscrew and swap out the SSD. You don't even really need a plastic prying tool. I just use my fingernail. Be extremely careful of all these ribbon cables and make sure you hang on to this heat shield and put it on the new SSD. And after that, you're good to go. Your Steam Deck, ROG Ally, will act like nothing ever happened. So now you have a new SSD, or you don't. That's an optional step. In order to get this thing to boot from another drive, like the USB drive that has Bazzite on it, you're gonna have to turn the device on while pressing the volume down button. But the tutorial told me to smash it, so I smashed it. Then you turn off secure boot. And this is the first problem. I know that Valorant requires secure boot for its anti-cheat, so I just can never play Valorant on here again, which is fine. I have a computer for that. But aside from that, turning off secure boot messes with some encryption settings. I don't know if this has anything to do with me transferring things to a new SSD using Macrium Reflect, but secure boot could mess with Windows and create a problem with your BitLocker encryption or whatever. My ally told me that I needed to enable BitLocker. To do this, turn your device off again and disable secure boot. When the device turns back on, go to your start menu and type in BitLocker, click device encryption settings, find your recovery key and follow those steps. The website they link to will give you your recovery key. I took a picture of that with my phone, then I went back into the BIOS, disabled secure boot again, and then when it booted up, I typed in that key from my phone. This is one of those things you shouldn't have to do, but it is likely you might run into a similar issue. Now you're finally ready to boot into Bazzite from that little USB drive that you made. Plug that sucker in, boot back into the BIOS, and select the USB drive as the boot drive. Once the Bazzite installer boots up, it's all extremely easy.
But this part might actually be the worst part because the tutorial I followed made me type in a bunch of stuff. So I definitely recommend using a keyboard for this and probably a mouse because the touch interface here is not the best. But after this, it's smooth sailing.
Bazzite gives you the option to install a few optional things. Leave the ones that it has checked. One of the optional things is EmuDeck. You can always do this later, but why not now? Also, it's recommended to get Decky Loader. Don't ask me why, but both tutorials that I saw said a lot about Decky Loader. Now that I have it on here, I have no idea what it is or where it is or how to access it. Oh wait, I think you go like this. I don't know. After a few more prompts and a 20-ish minute loading bar,
it will boot you into the normal Steam Deck setup.
Now, that's all you need to do for the most part. Congratulations, now you have Linux on your Windows machine. The tutorial that I watched goes on to have a few extra steps that are like terminal commands you have to copy and paste into your terminal. I don't think these are necessary to do anymore. I think they're baked into the install now, but I tried to follow along anyway. And I think I ended up installing a bunch of NVIDIA drivers that I don't need at all because this is an AMD machine. After that setup, we have a UI that looks identical to a Steam Deck, and it functions exactly like a Steam Deck.
Wow, it's Steam Deck.
The Armory Crate button brings up the side menu, the left button brings up the left menu. The whole UI is smooth and snappy, just like a Steam Deck. Unfortunately though, none of my games work. Hey man, this Steam Deck sucks. I didn't see any information on this and it scared me a lot, but don't worry. All I did was a system update just like you would do on a Steam Deck, and it just fixed everything. It feels like games load faster on here than they do on Windows or on my Steam Deck. They definitely run at higher specs than they do on a Steam Deck because the Ally is a higher spec machine. The Ally has a 1080p 120Hz screen, so games default to that. On Windows, Resident Evil 4 can do 1080p at around 50 frames per second with some frame stuttering.
On Linux, there's like 1 or 2 more frames, but 0 frame stuttering.
On Windows, I would want to drop the resolution down for a more comfortable experience. Here, I'm good leaving it just like this.
I booted up Resident Evil on Windows again, and this time, I didn't feel that stuttering like I did before. So, you know what? Bazzite and Windows might be more alike than I think. The difference, though, is that the Linux system will compile all of the shaders before it loads the game. And I think the stuttering might have just been the shaders compiling.
It's running great. Part of that is that Linux is so lightweight. You don't have all of that overhead of Windows. It just has to worry about getting the game running good, and it's doing a good job of that.
The first Descendant seems to load around the same time on both Bazzite and Windows. And at 1080p, I'd say they both perform about the same. No complaints here whatsoever with either of these. With Helldivers, I only really just jumped into the ship for a little bit, and these performed exactly the same. Although I will say, I think the lighting on the Windows one might look a little better, but I could just be making things up. It's an extremely negligible difference.
Before you dive into your own Bazzite install, I'll mention that Bazzite defaults to a really low TDP setting. I think it's 17 watts. If you double click the Armory Crate button, it'll bring up the Bazzite menu where you can increase the TDP all the way up to a custom 25 to 30. You'll want to do this for the games that I just tried. For indie games, you can lower it to get yourself more battery life. Bazzite even supports little things like RGB settings, which is kind of crazy for what is essentially a custom firmware. The only thing that did not work for me was video out through the Thunderbolt port.
Oh my god, it worked. Oh my god, I'm a liar. I swear it didn't work the first time.
So my ears perked up a little bit when I installed those NVIDIA drivers by accident, because that means maybe we can do something with this eGPU. And it does work in the Linux desktop, but it does not work in the SteamOS game mode, no matter what I tried. But maybe there's room for this in the future.
To go back to Windows, all you have to do is hold the volume down button while it's turning on and change the boot partition in the BIOS again. Unfortunately, you will have to do this every time you want to boot into Windows. I think that's fine, because right now, I'm really liking the Linux partition more than I'm liking messing around with Windows. Maybe in the future, I will want to change the default boot partition, but for right now, I'm cool with this. NerdNest texted me and said, "You gotta try Bazzite." And I rolled my eyes and said, why would I ever want to make my ROG Ally less compatible with games? And then I looked at my calendar and realized I had nothing to talk about this week, so here we are. But I never expected this to actually improve my ROG Ally experience at all. I greatly underestimated how much I would like a cleaner, snappier, simpler UI experience. I greatly underestimated how great games would run on here. The Steam Deck feels like a console, whereas Windows handhelds feel like weird-shaped laptops. With Bazzite, my Windows handheld now feels like a console. I think I'm a little biased because in my experience, adding custom firmware to a device usually makes the device worse about 70% of the time. There's a lot of times where that custom firmware does like one thing that's really cool, but a lot of other things that are way worse. And there's that 30% of the time where the custom firmware is just the best thing ever. The last time I did something similar to this was putting Chimera OS on my Ein Loki. That was a little bit involved, but it really wasn't so bad. But the experience of using it wasn't too great. The games didn't run too good. It didn't feel snappy at all. It was a little sluggish. And I think the problem there was that the Ein Loki is bad. Chimera OS is designed to be a universal solution to get you a Steam OS-like experience on a bunch of devices. Bazzite is made specifically for the ASUS ROG Ally and I guess the Lenovo Legion Go. If you have a Windows handheld, you probably don't mind messing around a little bit. I would give this a shot. It's not so hard to do. I would just highly recommend backing up your original SSD so you don't mess things up. Now, I don't think this should sway anyone away from getting a Steam Deck. The Steam Deck just comes all set up for you. It's the most console-like experience you can get in a PC handheld. It's also way cheaper. The Ally X is $800. Plus, I spent another $170 on the new SSD I put in here. But if you have an Ally X, or Lenovo Legion Go, yeah, sure, why not give this a shot? It might make you love your device all over again. One of the things I greatly underestimated is that I always reach for my Steam Deck because it's just so easy to get in and start gaming. And now, this might be that device for me. What do you guys think about turning your ASUS ROG Ally X into a Steam Deck? Do you think this completely defeats the purpose of getting an ROG Ally? Or do you think I convinced you that this might be worth it to you? Leave it in the comments below, add me on Twitter, any and all this other social media garbage. If you'd like to see just a regular old review of this device using Windows, I did that last week. You can go check out that video. Hey, if you're from New York, I'll be at Long Island Retro Game Expo in like a week or two. But if you're not from New York, you can just go to twitch.tv/WolffDen. We could talk there. Usually I'm messing around with this stuff over there. But lately I've been playing Nintendo World Championship. I've been a little addicted to that game. But the most important thing you can do to help support this channel is just subscribe right here. Share this video with a friend who maybe has one of these and might be interested in something like this. Thank you very much. Have yourself a good week.